Welcome to Paranormal Palace Radio, where truth equals reality, and truth is often stranger than fiction.
Hello everyone, welcome to Paranormal Palace Radio. This is your host, Royce the Redneck Radio Man, and joining me today is going to be Jim Harold, who many of you would probably recognize from his paranormal podcast or his Jim Harold's Campfire True Ghost Stories. And in fact, today we're going to be talking about his book that he has recently come out with that is a compilation of a lot of the stories that actually his best stories that he has had his listeners tell him from his Campfire podcast. Got a little tongue-tied there this morning. Maybe I hadn't had enough coffee yet. But at any rate, we're going to be talking about this here book and a little bit about him and let him I doubt he really needs an introduction, but I'm going to let him tell you a little something about himself anyway, just for the newcomers that haven't maybe been listening to Paranormal till recently or whatever. So, Jim, how you doing today?
I am doing great, Royce, and I just want to thank you so much for having me on your program. It's an honor and a privilege, and I'm so glad here to get to meet your listeners today. So I really appreciate it.
Well, it's really an honor to have you here. God knows I don't get to have people like you on here that's had a show, running for quite as long as you've had yours. I think you were just telling me you had your show, what was it, 4 or 5 years you just said?
Actually, I started in 2005, and, thank goodness for the internet. I just decided I wanted to do a show on the paranormal. I'd gone to school for broadcasting and ended up working in the field, but working behind the scenes. And I always said, I've kind of let that part in front of the mic slip away, and I'm going to recapture it, very similar to, something like you're doing and starting out. And anyhow, it just over the years it's grown and it's expanded, and I've gone to multiple shows, but I just feel so blessed to have the opportunity and have such a great bunch of listeners and viewers. We really appreciate it, and it's just so much fun. And Royce, I'm sure you feel there's so much to cover in this area of the paranormal. It's just fascinating to do the programs.
Oh, yes. In fact, I've just recently went through a week of, actually almost 2 weeks of having different people come on that's going to be speaking at the Aspect File Symposium in Taos, New Mexico, and at the, what was it called, Paracon conference up in Austin that's coming up October.
Yeah,
so,
that's great.
They're going to be doing ghost hunts and all kinds of things up there. It's going to be pretty exciting. But you know what? Listen to these people and talk about what they've done and what they're going to be doing, the kind of things that they've run into. It's really very interesting, but I got to hand it to you. I got to give you props. You did the one thing that I did not even think to do, and that was starting that Campfire podcast for listeners to tell their stories. Because I've been doing this since about 2006 myself, and like you, what you did for so long before you did the Campfire, I've been, interviewing people like Dennis Balthaser, Stanton Freeman, Marie Jones, but never did I think about the listeners and their stories. I mean, I've had a few come on, but I never thought about, setting aside a show special for it, in other words. So I got to tell you, and the book that it resulted in for you, I thought was fascinating. I thought it was a good idea you had, to be honest with you.
Well, what happened was, and I kind of lucked into all of it because I just decided it would be fun to do, and maybe even a listener suggested it. Can you dedicate a show of the Paranormal Podcast to listener stories? And I can't remember if I thought of that or if a listener emailed in, but either way, I decided to do a show, and it went so well and was so well received, and it was just so much fun. I thought, well, geez, this is really something that could hold up on its own as a show. And in terms of and it has. And then in terms of the book, and she's one of the people I dedicate the book to, Annie Wilder, who was a great person, and an author in her own right. She said, Jim, you ought to do a book. And after a little bit of aw shucks and kind of saying, oh, well, I can't do a book. Then I got to thinking about it, and it's like, well, really, the Campfire show would really support a book, because the thing is, Royce, a lot of times when you try to tell people you have a radio show on the internet or you have a podcast on the internet, unfortunately, a lot of times the average person is intimidated. They think it's complicated. They think it's hard to access. And so sometimes these great stories go unheard. And I thought, the one thing I can do is put them in a book form, and pretty much everybody can relate to a book. It's kind of funny. I've got a funny anecdote about that. My parents live down south. They live in West Virginia, and they have they don't have the internet and really don't know much about computers. I've tried to explain this to them over the years, and I go down and I'll play them some things. They're like, "Oh, that's nice, Jimmy." That's what they call me, Jimmy. But then I sent them the book, and they're like, "Oh, well, this is a book." People understand that. So it's a great way to get the stories out there, because I think there's 73 stories in the book, and I didn't want those to go not heard by the average person. So now it's accessible to everybody.
Well, I think that's a great thing, too. And I want to also let everybody know that your website is www.jimharold.com. And I think you've got other websites as well, don't you, Jim?
Oh, yeah. I have jimharold.com, which is my main site. That's where you can go and you can get almost 400 shows for free. You can go and listen. There's hours and hours and hours. And increasingly, I have people who have been going back who are new listeners, and they get on and they listen to all the shows back to 2005. And I do Paranormal Podcast, which is my show with authors and experts like Brad Steiger and Marie D. Jones, who I know you've had on many times. And then there's Campfire. Then there's another show that I do with Clayton Morris from Fox News. You'll see him on Fox News on the weekends on Fox and Friends. He's one of the hosts there. I do the weekly video paranormal report. And then I've branched out to yet another podcast, free podcast called Weird News Radio with Kate Botello, who used to co-host the Screensavers with Leo Laporte. So those are all my free podcasts. Those are free. There's no charge for those. And then for people who are super fans and have been with me and listened to all my free stuff and they want more, there's a Plus Club that you can join and get more podcasts about conspiracies and true crime and so forth. But usually the starting place is really jimharold.com. See how you like that. Again, there's a ton of content right there, and then go from there.
Yeah, I know there's been a lot out there about conspiracies. I mean, goodness knows Jeff Rense has spent years covering it.
Yes. Yes.
You go to his website and you got a whole big long page plumb full of, news articles about it, in fact. And he's got a lot of information out there. And I noticed you had a lot of information on your site as well. And I found it a very interesting site. You know what? I know who recommended you to me, or I told you before the show started. It just now hit me. It was a guy named Marco. He goes by Marco.
Oh, yeah. Is it the gentleman in the book with the missing time story?
Yes, that's exactly who he is.
Yeah, he's a great fan and a great listener. And he has a great story. Royce, do we want to tell folks his story? Because I think it's fantastic.
Sure, why don't you?
Okay, well, here's the story. Marco called in. Now, Marco's situation is that he had some illness, some health issues. And thankfully, the good news is, folks, last time I spoke to him, all is well. But is one of the things to help him cope with these issues that he was going through is he liked to go out to the movies with his wife. And one day they went to the movies, and they went to see the movie called Hellboy, if you remember that movie from a few years ago.
Oh, yeah, me and my son Josh just piled in front of the TV and watched it together.
Well, I'll tell you, so he went to one of those, I think it was 2004, he went to one of those Cineplexes where they have 7 or 10 screens or something like that. And they were going for the 2:45 show. And they went and they got their concessions and everything, and Marco told me he only likes to go early because he never wants to miss a minute of the movie, because after all, you're paying big money these days for movies. Why not see it all? So they went a little early. They went and got their popcorn and everything. So they went to the ticket taker and they took his tickets and they went in. And, the theater was darkened, and they thought they entered at about 2:30 or 2:35. And they noticed that something was playing on the screen. They thought, oh, well, maybe the credits, not the credits, but the trailers, the little commercials before a movie started to come on. So they thought, well, at least we haven't missed the movie. And they sat down All of a sudden they realized these aren't the trailers. This is part of the movie. And then a couple minutes went on and they realized this is not even the beginning of the movie. This is the end of the movie. So anyway, a couple minutes go by and they see the end of the movie and the credits roll. And, it was interesting. He after it's over, he turns to one of the guys next to him and he says, well, what time movie was this? Thinking that he went to the wrong screen or something. And he said, well, this was the 2:45 movie. And he just thought, well, we just walked in at 2:30. So they went out and talked to the ticket taker. And they said, we just wanted to make sure we're at the right screen here, because those multiple screen theaters, they could have a movie playing on 2 or 3 screens at the same time. He said, no, this is the only screen this is on. And he's like, well, do you remember us? And he said, yeah, I remember you. You came to the 2:45 show. It's like, but the movie's over. And the guy was basically, yeah, it's 4:30. So basically what happened was they walked in, and somehow they ended up with about 1 hour and 45 minutes of missing time. And even when they went to the lobby, they looked, the sun was cast down further than it was when they came in. And to this day, Marco says he has no explanation for it. And also that that was one of those situations where he just always wonders about it. And every time that movie comes on cable, he says he thinks of it. And still has no explanation whatsoever. Missing time.
He never told me about that story. He did tell me that he was interested in time travel and that he had had an experience with missing time, but he didn't give me all the details. But I got to tell you, a situation like that, because you're in a theater surrounded by, 50, 60 people or more.
Yep.
If you disappeared or were abducted, you would think somebody would notice. You have to ask, was he awake? Did his mind just travel or daydream or?
But it wasn't just him. He was with his wife and she experienced the same thing.
Yeah, that is kind of weird. I think if I would have been him though, I would have been asking some people if they saw us leave or anything, or if they experienced anything unusual, because you have to wonder how many other people in that same room experienced the same thing.
Yeah, I'll tell you, that's something else. I think I would have been just totally dumbfounded. I wouldn't have been able to figure it out. And this whole idea that, and a lot of times missing time, for example, is associated with alien abduction and that kind of thing. And he didn't necessarily think that was the case or had any other signs of anything like that, of that being the case. It's just one of those strange things that are inexplicable. And the interesting thing, and Royce, you've been at it about the same amount of time as I have, that I'm guessing you'll agree with, maybe not, but when I started all this, I thought this will be great, because the reason I definitely wanted to get back into broadcasting / podcasting, but the other reason that I did it was because I really had a true love and interest of the paranormal. And this is actually a little bit before it was as big a deal as it is now. So it wasn't to get into some kind of fad or anything like that. It was just that it always fascinated me. And I had this attitude when I first started, this is going to be fantastic. I'm going to do this for 6 months, 12 months, whatever I do it for. And I'm going to get the answers to all these questions from these great experts like Stanton Friedman and people like that. And the truth is, Royce, and I don't know if you have the same experience, I have more questions now than when I started.
Oh, I definitely have more questions than when I started. I mean, I'll be honest with you. When I was up in Bryan back in the 80s, or early 90s, I think it was, I used to watch all these, sci-fi shows with the UFO things in them and the ghost stories and ancient mysteries and, the whole shamir. And I heard some really, really strong cases, and I used to sit there and evaluate it and, well, of course, what they're not telling you here is, that type of thing. But then I got, on the internet and got involved in Yahoo groups, and what I found out was nobody could agree on anything. And there was a lot of arguments going on, and I thought, well, why don't I get a website and provide a safe haven for people to come to where they won't have people that like trolls coming in, for example.
Right.
I'll monitor them and keep them out myself. And then somewhere down the line, I noticed people were doing internet radio shows, and I thought, well, maybe if I get on the air and I can get some of these people on here to talk, I can get some, information out there that's from people that's, up to date, that's actually doing it, not just, stories you hear third, fourth, and fifth hand, in other words.
Yeah, and the thing that I gotta say is I love the fact that there's so many of us doing this. I mean, in the old days it was like, oh, it's competitive, and with, traditional radio, because there's so few outlets, but here there's room for everybody. And I just think it's great. And I think it's one of the reasons that this topic has taken on such interest, is because there's so many of us out there on the internet doing these things. And I don't know about your situation, but I know with me, if I'd gone to a radio station 6 years ago and said, guys, here's what I want to do. Was a broadcasting major, but I haven't done anything in, 12 or 13 years. I want to do a radio show on the paranormal, interviewing experts. They would have A, laughed me out of the building, or B, they would have said, sure, we've got a slot for you. It can be $500 a week, and that'll be on, Saturday mornings at 6 a.m. And what I was able to do, instead, for, a very modest investment, was start my own radio show. And, I've upgraded and done different things over the years, but started at a very low cost and have built a following, and probably, it's certainly one of the top, paranormal podcasts on iTunes, and probably definitely the number one free, paranormal podcast, American paranormal podcast, on iTunes. So just to be able to build that yourself without having to ask somebody's permission, I salute what you've done. You've created a forum for people to go online and discuss these things. And these things were out of our power, Royce, a mere 10, 15, 20 years ago. And
True.
Now look what we've been able to do. I mean, I think, and not just me and not just you, but many people have been able to do.
Kevin
and it just
Smith.
speaks, exactly. It speaks to the power of the internet and the great opportunity that it provides us.
Oh, I agree 100%. I mean, I've seen videos of, David Icke walk into a studio. So he was scheduled to be interviewed, and the minute they found out he was going to talk about, shape-shifting, human reptilians, all of a sudden he was, out the door. Whereas somebody like you or me would, at least hear him out and see what he had to say.
Absolutely.
Even if it sounded fantastic. I mean, that's what the strange and unknown is all about.
Exactly. And that's something that I try to do. My theories of the theories of the paranormal are this. I'm probably what you would call a skeptical believer. In other words, I believe the majority of what people claim or think is paranormal is probably not paranormal at all. It's probably either well-meaning people who were mistaken. You will have sometimes people with mental issues, quite honestly, and then other people, unfortunately, there are some people out there who will hoax. But let's say, for instance, that 95% of everything that is said to be paranormal is not, that it's explicable one way or the other. At least 5%. Well, if it's only 5%, heck, if it's only 1%, that's millions and millions and millions of cases. And that's where I kind of have a disagreement with the hardcore skeptics. I've had Dr. Michael Shermer on my show, who's probably, along with James Randi, the best known skeptic in the country right now. Very nice guy. I appreciate he took the time because, he's been on national TV and he's very well known. He has his own magazine and everything. Very nice guy. Enjoyed him. Just because we disagree doesn't mean we have to be disagreeable. But he said something to the effect, and this is not a direct quote, and I kind of said what I just said to you, and he said, well, we understand that there's a small percentage that's not explicable, but we just put those on a shelf. And it's like, wait a minute. Why don't we examine that 1% or 5% or whatever that percent is? So I guess the funny thing is I told him, with the skeptics, I probably agreed with you 95% of the time, but the problem is that inability or unwillingness to look at that other 5% and see what's really going on, because I believe more than ever there is something more to life than just science. I believe there's something else going on. What it is, I don't know. But I believe there is something out there rather than just the hard sciences.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with you. I don't see how we could really have an existence without something that's unexplained. Just our very existence really hasn't been satisfactorily explained, if you ask me. Yeah, sure, they got the Big Bang but then what started the Big Bang and how far back can they take this, So unexplained has to have a place somewhere.
I agree. And it started for me. Do you mind if I share a story in the book?
Sure, please do.
Well, actually, my interest probably was inspired as a young child. My dad had a couple of stories that he always told me, and they're actually in the book. Of the 73 stories, 68 of them are from my listeners. 5 stories are from me or my family.
Oh, wow.
That's what I call, that section I call eating my own dog food, because the idea is that I've experienced some strange things. And I think I was inspired to be interested in all this by these stories from my dad growing up. And one of them's my favorite. Now, you'd have to know my dad. He was a steel worker. He actually came up from West Virginia to work in the steel mills up in Ohio, like so many people in the 50s and 60s and so forth. So he was up here with my uncle, and they lived in a small apartment over a bar. And one night they were both asleep, and I don't know the exact date, but I'm guessing this was around 1960. So anyway, they were both asleep. There was one way to get in the apartment and one way out. It was very modest, very small. And all of a sudden, my dad wakes up and there's somebody standing over him smiling. Well, my dad was probably about 25, 26 years old at the time. So about, 210 pounds, 6 foot tall, just got out of the service. So pretty fit guy. Played football. So he proceeded to take a big swing at this whatever it was. And he said that this figure was smiling at him, and he found nothing but air. He started screaming, and he and my uncle got up and they looked all around the apartment. And there's nobody there. My uncle's kind of laughing at him, saying, "There's nobody here, Jim. You're crazy." So anyway, about 2 weeks later, they're both asleep, and all of a sudden my dad hears my uncle screaming. And same profile. They were a year within each other. I think my uncle's a couple inches taller than my dad. So another guy you wouldn't want to be on the connecting end of a punch with when he was 25, 26 years old. And he took a swing, nothing. Same guy was standing over him. So after that, my uncle didn't laugh at my dad so much. Now here's the kicker to the story. After they got to thinking, they realized that the person who was standing over them was a man who used to always come into the bar, and they would occasionally buy him a drink. But it would be strange that they would be seeing him because he had died about a year earlier. So, so that's one of my favorite stories in the book. And the thing is about my dad, he doesn't have pyramids under his bed. He is probably not real keen on getting in touch with his chakras. He's not exactly, he was raised Protestant, straight down the line, nothing real esoteric or super spiritual.
Right.
Just a salt of the earth guy who just said, "Hey, I know what I saw, and that's what I saw."
Yeah, I know how he was raised. I was a Pentecostal preacher's kid myself.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah, I think you had a lot of good stories in this book when I was going through it, actually. I know that's the one about Lizzie Borden. This lady actually felt people grabbing her toes and lifting her feet up by the toes, in other words. And, that would be pretty spooky for me.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, she went with her boyfriend to a bed and breakfast, and it was the bed. I'm just pulling up the story here so I have it in front of me. But her boyfriend was really into the paranormal. So they went to Lizzie Borden's bed and breakfast, which is in Massachusetts. And they were really, they're really excited. So they took a tour and they told them all about Lizzie Borden and those kind of things. Now, the one thing that the woman wanted to make sure is that she didn't want to sleep. She didn't want to fall asleep. She said, we're going to go here, but I'm kind of freaked out by this. So anyway, eventually her boyfriend kept complaining he's tired. And she said, "Okay, we can go to bed, but here are the rules. You have to sleep with your back to me. We cannot turn off the lights, and I don't want you to go to sleep until you hear me snoring."
Which he did anyway.
He did anyway. So she's all by herself. She says she's laying there, and all of a sudden she felt something pick up her toes, lift her foot up, and then drop it. And she said, I know that I'm awake. I know that the lights are on. I know that I'm under the covers. Nothing could have grabbed my leg without me noticing. I'm just going to ignore and try to go back to sleep. So she lie back down, and again a few minutes later, she felt something pick up her toes, lift up her foot, and drop it. So she said she definitely knew something was going on as soon as she got into it, because something really, really bad had happened there. They said that they felt a spirit in the bathroom as well, and they felt like when they were both taking their individual showers that something was staring at them the whole time. They said the feeling from the bathroom, she says, this is Gwen from New York, she says it was a really heavy kind of evil feeling, but the one in the bedroom picking up her foot was just a playful, fun spirit. And it turned out that she went downstairs and she talked to one of the people with the place and said that they had felt something too in that very room, a strange experience. So, I mean, these things, again, the thing that I love about it, because somebody said, well, they say true ghost stories. How do you know that they're true? Well, the point is that, I didn't have anybody hooked up to a polygraph. I can't tell you with absolute metaphysical certitude that these things happen, but I sensed, I picked the stories where I sensed people being sincere, because people, Royce, will come on the show and they'll tell me a story that happened to them 20 years ago. And when they were a little kid, 20, 30 years ago, and sometimes they'll almost sound like they're ready to break down. A lot of times people will come on and tell these stories, and they've never told anybody in their life because they thought people would think they'd be crazy. And that's kind of the cool thing about the Campfire show, and I think we're up to 80-something episodes, and you can go over to jimharold.com, that's JIMHAROLD.com, and check that out. But the thing is, Royce, is that I thought this show was just going to be kind of fun and kind of a neat little diversion, and it certainly is. But I didn't mean this. I didn't know that this was going to mean so much to people, because people have said, this makes me feel like I'm not crazy. Even if people haven't come on the show, they just listened to it. They said something weird happened to me just like that. And all these years I thought that I was nuts and all these different things. And now it turns out that I've heard the same kind of story on your show. So it's really been a lot of fun to share these stories and to have people have that kind of reaction and feel comfortable enough to come on the story to tell the show to tell their stories.
Yeah, because I know, like you say, there's a real stigmatism behind people not wanting to tell their story for fear of ridicule. However, like you, I have noticed, talking to one of my guests, that people in the chat room, when I'm watching for questions in there, will be making comments that they've experienced similar things. And I think that when they know they're around people that are involved in this here, they tend to feel a little, freer to talk, because it's like a difference between going to your neighborhood church and telling them I saw a ghost or I have a new spell of witchcraft, where you're likely to get ridiculed.
Right.
Or coming amongst a bunch of people that are actually into the paranormal phenomena and are trying to understand it better, where you're less likely to get the same kind of ridicule.
Right, I agree. I mean, I think it's really, it's nice to have places like your website and your forums and my show where people can come and they feel comfortable, because the truth is, and this is one of my favorite things, Royce, is when people say, well, I don't believe in this stuff. But you have to wait for what the next sentence is. I don't believe in this stuff. But there was this one time. And I think that's true. I think what happens is even people who are kind of poo-poo this stuff and say it's all a lot of hocus pocus. The truth is, most of them at one time or another in their life have had something unusual happen to them. And if you can break down their defenses, they'll tell you, well, I don't believe in this stuff, and who knows what it was. But there was this time that I saw a green glowing ghost in my living room. Or there was this one time where I saw what I thought might be a UFO. I think that makes a difference. And the one invitation that I would make to people, not only can they listen to my show, they can go to jimharold.com, JIMHAROLD.com, and they can also sign up to tell their stories. There's a tab at the top. It says Campfire Sign Up. You just go there. You fill out a very simple form, an email form. It kicks out an email to me. You select a time. I list my upcoming shows, and what happens is you give me your contact info, and I call you at that time or Skype you, and we record it, and we have you on the show. In fact, tonight I have I have a taping later tonight with several people already lined up who are going to tell their stories. So that's how we garner the stories. And, it's been almost 2 years now, and people really seem to enjoy it.
I wanted to also mention to everybody that if y'all would like to call in, the number is 632, area code 832, number 632-7904. And, you can call in and you can ask questions. In fact, we got a call coming in now.
Oh, great.
Caller, you're on the air.
Hi, this is your wife.
Oh.
I just wanted to share with him about something that's recently happened in our home. The other day we were sitting at the kitchen, at the dining room table, and we were all eating. There was nobody else in the kitchen. There was nobody in the kitchen, and I heard it anyway, a fork being thrown into the sink, or sometimes silverware being thrown into the sink. And then, a lot of times I lay down in my bed, or sit on my bed watching TV, and I can feel like there's somebody that sit down beside me, but there's nobody there. I feel the bed actually move.
Ooh, that is spooky.
That's saying something, because our mattress is one of those thermopedic mattresses. The kind that you put a glass of wine on and you jump up and down on it and the glass don't spill.
Well, the thing is that weird stuff happens. My wife, this isn't in the book, but my wife keeps saying that she calls him Casper, because one time she was in our bedroom, and I think she was coming out of the bedroom, and it was around Christmas time. So she was Christmas time or birthday or something, and she had one of those rolls of gift paper. She was walking out of the room, and she felt something pull on the other end, and she thought it was one of the kids or me or whatever. Turns out that we were all well away from her, and she swears she found somebody. And it's funny, because usually I take the role of the believer. In this case, I'm like, there's nothing. It's just in your mind. But she swears, she thinks occasionally from time to time that we get some kind of visitor.
And sometimes we have pictures on my bookshelf, and nobody would be around them, and they'll fall off, and stuff like that. It's really weird.
Yeah.
I believe this house is haunted. My aunt haunts it, and my uncle, I believe, haunts it. And also, we have the air conditioner that the kind that you turn.
Yeah.
You have to turn it all the way instead. It's not the push button, and the air conditioner will turn itself on.
Oh my. Oh my.
I have a lot of stories that I could tell you, but we don't have all day. But I'm definitely a believer.
Well, feel free to come on the Campfire show and tell me one of your best stories, and we'll also make sure to get in a plug for the Paranormal Palace.
Oh, I sure will.
Actually, I'm putting your link in the chat room as well, www.jimharold.com, for those of you that would like to go over there and check them out. I'm pretty sure a lot of you probably already have, and maybe not all of you though, but I don't know. I'm not in everybody's house to say, but
we've got technology, but we don't have that mastered yet.
No, not until I get my psychic abilities.
There you go. That sounds good.
Was there anything else, babe?
No, that was it. I just wanted to share that with him.
Well, thank you so much. It was nice to meet you. Thanks for sharing your story.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Bye-bye. She listens to my shows off and on, but that's one of the first times I think she's called in.
Oh, well, I'm honored. That's great.
You had some other stories in here that I thought were really fascinating too. I was going to mention to you the one about the scientists turned with the supernatural.
Oh, yeah. Australia. Yeah.
Science meets the supernatural. That one. Yeah,
that was a cool one. It was a guy who was from Australia, and he was an intern where he's studying to be a doctor. I'm pulling it up now. And basically what happened was he was I guess, they keep really long hours when they're studying to be a doctor. So he ended up going to, there was like dormitories connected to the hospital. He had been on afternoon shift, and he's on call, he finished at about 11 at night, and he went down to the casualty section. That's what they call the ER in Australia. And he said, I'm on call tonight. Now, if anything comes in, they would page him. So he went over to like the dorms or whatever they have. He was on the 4th floor, and it's like really, really kind of labyrinth to get to it. So the only way to get into the building was the service tunnel. And so on the end of the shift, he went down, got his pager logged on, and said he was on call, and went off to his room. So they would page him if something came up. So anyway, he went up to this 4th floor, and you pass the security section, and there's someone there stationed to see who's coming and going. And he told the attendant there, I'm on call tonight. I've got my pager. It's working. I'll see you later on. So he went up to his room and went to bed. And, it was very warm, and it was difficult trying to get to sleep, but he finally did it, or he was about ready to nod up. And he thought, I've got to be back at work at 7, so he needs to sleep. So anyway, he lay there, and the next thing he knew, he could hear footsteps coming up the stairwell. Now, he thought that it was just someone else coming off shift and going to bed. But then he heard somebody walk past his door. They walked about 2 doors down, and then he heard the sudden loud knocking on the door 2 doors down, and then this person called his name out. And he said, they instead of calling him Mark, which was his name, they called him Mr. And he said it was very unheard of. At that time, they would call you by your first name. So, anyway, he thought that they just got a hold of the wrong person, so he laid there a few minutes, and then 10 minutes went past, and he said, this is really getting strange. So he got up and walked down to the foyer, and he picked up the phone and rang down to the ER department, and he said, it's Mark here. Did you send somebody up for a call? He said, no, it's really been quiet since you left. Nothing's come in. He said, that's really odd because somebody's just been up here a few minutes ago looking for me. They called out and knocked on Alvin, that's his friend's door, and called him out, and he said, I want to know what's going on. And she said, well, everything's been quiet and nothing's come in. If something come in, we'd have used your pager. So they went and checked with security, and he said nobody had come up, and if somebody had come up and knocked on the door, security would have seen him. So basically, it turns out that he was talking to folks around the hospital. Long story short is that the hospital's well known to be haunted. So maybe this was somebody from years and years ago calling him Mister. It's time to go to work. They didn't have pagers back then, I guess. So pretty cool story.
Yeah, it was. Then he had another story right behind that same gentleman with the boy down at the lake or the waterfalls, was it?
Oh yeah, I think I know the one that you're talking about here. It is, bear with me while I page over to it. I think you're talking about the one where there had been the small boy. Was it the small boy who said that he had a son, and his son was young, and his son was having some issues, if I remember correctly in the story here, and he seemed to be agitated and tired all the time. And then he kept saying that there was a child that would come into his bedroom every night, and he said all the kid wants to do is play with my toys, and he wants me to play with him and won't go away. And Mark, his father, said, okay, have you told him to go away? And his son said, yeah, I told him to go away because it makes me tired. And Mark says, well, just put your foot down and just ignore it. And then he thought, of course, his son here had an overactive imagination. So they let it go for a while. And one night he got home from his shift at the hospital about midnight. And his wife had late dinner ready, and they were having the usual talk, and then they were sitting at the kitchen table, and suddenly your attention was brought to the front door, and what came through the front door flabbergasted them. It was a bright ball of light about the size of a squash ball, if you've ever seen those, maybe a little bit smaller than a tennis ball, and it had the intensity of an arc welding light, but it didn't hurt your eyes. It came straight through the solid door and stopped in the hallway, and it remained there for a second or two. And then proceeded down the hallway and did a left-hand turn right into his son's room. Now, he said he's seen ball lightning before, but this was totally different. And obviously, he's taken physics and different sciences, and he said it was not a ball of lightning. He said He wasn't the only ones that actually saw it. They had an old tomcat at them at the time, and he took off after it straight into the son's room. And he said the next minute you could hear this almighty cat fight going on. And the next thing we saw was the poor cat come screaming out of his son's room, completely fluffed up like he'd been through a tumble dryer. And he shot through the back door, and they said they didn't see him for 3 days. He had gotten hungry out in the bush, maybe, when he left for so long and finally came back. They went into the son's room. There was nothing stirred. Now, over the years while they were in the house, they kept thinking that they had a fourth child. They have 3 kids, and every time they would get in the car, they'd always think there was a 4th kid back there, not 3, but a 4th. And what was interesting is that I believe what happened was they found out that there had been, I think, a small child who had died not too far from there. Tragically, if I'm not, at one of the local dams. So that kind of made me wonder, and there's one anecdote in here where literally they thought the one child was in the back and there was nobody there. So maybe it was that small child that had that untimely tragic end. And it's just amazing the kind of stories you get. And again, I love these credible stories from people who are doctors or military folks or policemen or those kind of things, pilots, because, the average person like me, maybe what I say doesn't make as much sense. I don't know a lot of the sciences and things, but somebody like that or a pilot, if they see a UFO, I tend to put a little more stock in that, Royce. So it is fascinating when you get these people. And one quick note, I love the fact he's from Australia. We've always done so well in Australia and overseas. I'm sure you see the same kinds of things. And I love the fact of what we do. It's interesting when you think of a great broadcaster like Paul Harvey, the late great Paul Harvey,
or somebody
like that.
I loved him, and
but and at his most powerful, maybe he was probably on the military networks, but he was not able to get into the homes of people in Australia, and we've got a great opportunity here. So it's really enjoyable.
Yeah, I tend to, agree with you. It is really enjoyable. And like you, I tend to put more stock into the folks that are, with the military, airline pilots, people like doctors and lawyers, police. It's kind of hard to say that these people are hallucinating to begin with.
Right.
It's doubtful that they're going to be drunk, especially out of their own duty. They're used to, taking notes, making notes of small details, evaluating it. They're not given to, flights of fantasy, in other words.
Exactly. So the thing is not that I discount the average person. God bless them. There's a lot more of us average people than the people who are steeped in these various sciences. It's just that to me, it does take on a little more interest when it is somebody in that category.
That's true. Not long ago, I even had Leslie Keene on. I'm sure you probably talked to her.
Yes, fantastic.
About her new book about governments and airline pilots and officials going on the record.
Yep.
That would be a worthwhile read.
Oh, yes. I have that book I'm looking at right now on my shelf. It's a fantastic book, and it kind of shows you that this stuff is real. And another good book that I would recommend too is Area 51 by Annie Jacobson. Not had her on the show. I'd love to, but she talks about the government experimentation in terms of military craft. So, I think there's a certain amount of this, when you talk about the UFO phenomena, for example, I think a certain amount is due to government experimentation, but still there are other things that just aren't explicable in that template, and Leslie did such a fantastic job. And that's really, to me, that is one of the most important UFO books written since I've started this. I think it's one of the best ones out there, period. I think if somebody said they wanted to start with the UFO phenomena, I would recommend some of Stanton Friedman's classic works, and I would also recommend Leslie's book.
And I'd also recommend Kevin Randall.
Oh, yes, absolutely. We've had him on as well. His book, Crash, When UFOs Fall from the Sky.
I got that one on my shelf.
Yeah. I talked to him about that, and that is a great book, and I'm looking at that one, too. That's on my shelf, too.
Also, it's got 15 minutes left, and I know you got an interview to go to after you leave here, so I wanted to give you a chance to put a plug in for your next show that you're going to.
Well, let's see, which one is it? I've been doing a lot of these. I think this one is called Mental Radio. And let me see what that is. Let me get the URL for you if people want to check that out. Mental Radio is, let me just make sure I've got it right here, mentalradio.net. I'm not sure, I hate to say this, I'm not sure if this is live or this is Memorex. But yeah, it looks like it's coming up here. I think they start several, well, I'm not sure. I think they start here in about 15 minutes, and that is mentalradio.net. And I believe Reginald is the host over there. So looking forward to talking to him. And I've really appreciated our time here, Royce. It's so good to meet new people that maybe you haven't had a chance to meet before, even if it's over the internet. And people are of like mind, because I think we both agree. The idea behind what you do and what I do is get the information out there and let people decide for themselves. And sometimes I'll interview and talk to people that maybe I don't personally agree with their point of view, but that's not the point whether I agree or disagree. It's for me to help be a facilitator and bring the information out.
Exactly.
And then let folks make their own decisions, because I think people are intelligent and they're smart enough to decide, is this the real deal or maybe not?
I would tend to agree with you 100%. I also want to let everybody know that, pardon me, folks, his book, Campfire, True Ghost Stories, is on the front page, at least for right now. Tomorrow I'll move it to the archives along with this here show for future reference for anybody wants to listen to it. So y'all can either go to Amazon.com or Barnes & Noble or his website, or if you're listening to our show in the archives tomorrow, the next day, you can click on it. It's linked to the Amazon in the archive section there. And also, I always like to, when I get a chance, put a little plug in for United Paranormal International, where I'm the South Texas director. They're a group that's made a safe haven for people that want to investigate paranormal around the globe. They've got directors in different state chapters around the globe. So you gotta be able to, if you're looking for a ghost hunter in your area or a ufologist in your area, you may be able to find one there. And I got to tell you, it's been a great pleasure having you on the show as well. I want to remind everybody also to come back Tuesday night at 8 p.m. when I'll be interviewing Marie Jones and her book, Destiny versus Choice, which me and Jim both agree is a very good book. And
yep.
Don't you have her coming up pretty soon on your show, or did you just have her about this book?
We just had her on a couple of weeks ago about this book, and I even saw where she's posting about another book that's coming up. I think it's time travel. I can't remember exactly, but
yes.
She's prolific. I think she puts out 3 or 4 books a year. She's really, she's a delightful person. She's one of the top paranormal authors out there, and we're always so privileged to talk to her when she has time. And also, she was kind enough to put a blurb on the back of my book, so I really do have to thank her for this. And Royce, I thank you again for this opportunity. I really, really do appreciate it. I would invite your listeners to go over to jimharold.com. That's JIMHAROLD.com. There they can look at almost 400 different podcasts. Those are free. That includes some audio and that video weekly show I do with my buddy Clayton Morris.
And I would recommend that they go over there too. I did listen into that one with Marco, and you know, I've been doing this here almost as long as you have, and I don't have the art down as good as you do, but then too, I didn't go to college like you did either.
I think you do a fine job. And the thing is that we all come in with our different styles. And I think there's room for everybody, and I think everybody has something a little bit different to contribute. I mean, if I talk to Marie, you know, the questions I ask are going to be somewhat different than the ones that you're going to ask, and you're going to bring your spin to it, new information to it. So I think it's great what you're doing.
Well, thank you, Jim. I really appreciate it, and I really think it's great what you are doing. I really salute people like you, Jerry Pippin, Kevin Smith, and Jeff Rentz, George Nuri, even Art Bell when he was doing it. I don't think Art Bell really broadcasts anymore anywhere, though, does he?
Unfortunately not. And I gotta say, I mean, other than probably Long John Nebel before I was alive, WOR, he was really the father of all this. I mean, if you go back to Long John Nebel, who was a host for WOR in New York back into the 60s, he was doing paranormal. But in terms of the modern day Art Bell starting out in the 80s, really, he's the father, and I think that it's kind of like the way I compare it to, if you watch any talk show today, on TV, everybody owes a debt to Johnny Carson. I think anybody that does this and talks paranormal on the radio or on the internet, I think we all owe a debt of gratitude to Art Bell because he really kind of got the whole ball rolling and kind of showed us all how it's done.
Yeah, I would tend to agree. And I used to listen to his show before he handed it over to George Noory, who I often joke about being a little jealous of George Noory because he's got the voice for it.
Both those guys have fantastic voices. Every day I wish I could drop the octave. You know, I actually just picked up a new mic. Actually it's the same model that Art Bell uses and Leo Laporte and a lot of great broadcasters, a Heil PR40. And I always joke, now if I could only get some of their talent, I'd be all set. And that great voice.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with you. I would like to have George Noory on my show one of these days, but I don't know how to contact him.
Yeah, I think once those guys hit that big time, sometimes it's a little more difficult, but I'd give it a shot. Why not?
Yeah, why not? Nothing to lose. Well, listen, Jim, I really have enjoyed having you on. As a matter of fact, I'd love to have you back again in the future. If you would like to come, just let me know if you got something new going on you want to tell my listeners about. I don't want to hold you up right now. I notice it's 10 minutes till, and I'd like to leave you a few minutes to get you a fresh cup of coffee and whatever, preparations you might like to make between now and the next show.
Sounds good. Well, thank you again, Royce. It was so nice meeting you and your audience.
And it's been a pleasure having you on my show. I really enjoyed meeting you, and I'd like to stay in touch.
Sounds good.
Okay, we'll talk to you later. And